Hi, everyone. A blockbuster day of news today. It's 4 o'clock in New York, pulling the curtain back on an extraordinary scheme hatched by a former American president, his fixer, and a big-time ally of his in the tabloid media. It was a plan crafted to cast then-candidate Donald Trump in a positive light in the all-important tabloids, boosting stories that were favorable to him, silencing ones that weren't, and smearing everyone that got in the way. The witness on the stand today in Trump's criminal election interference hush money trial detailed exactly how the scheme worked on a day-to-day basis. David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Inquirer, described a relationship with Donald Trump that dated back to the late 1980s. Pecker noted that Trump was one of the first people to call him and congratulate him when he bought the National Enquirer back in 1999. So their friendship was already a long-standing one by the time his friend Donald Trump decided to run for president. What Pecker described on the stand today, amid questioning from Manhattan da Bragg's team, was the details and the operational aspects of that explicit agreement between Trump, his lawyer Michael Cohen, and David Pecker, and what they did to boost Trump's campaign. Pecker said he would look out for Trump and act as his, quote, eyes and ears. And he also described a practice where he would, quote, embellish stories that Michael Cohen sent over to him about Trump's competition. The big moment showcasing, again, how this arrangement functioned, the all-important Trump Tower meeting in August of 2015 among these three men. Pecker described Trump and his former fixer asking him what he and his magazines could do to help the Trump campaign. Pecker said he told them if he heard anything negative, he would notify Cohen right away, and then he would be able to have those stories killed. Like everything Trump did, this part of the plan was not put into writing. Pecker referred to them as just an agreement among friends. But a huge, illuminating moment came toward the end of Pecker's time on the stand today when the alleged affair between Trump and former Playboy model Karen McDougal was discussed. It was a moment, according to the New York Times, when Trump's body language changed. He started moving his head, squinting and pursing his lips, and then crossed his arms over his chest. Here's a chunk of that exchange, according to our sources in the courtroom. Pecker said, quote, prior to this, I was speaking to Cohen once a week, but once this issue came up, I was speaking to him every day, sometimes multiple times a day. This was the first week of June 2016. The prosecution then asked, quote, did Michael Cohen ask you to communicate with him in a particular way? Pecker responded, yes. He said we shouldn't speak over a landline. We should use Signal. I didn't know what that was, so he explained it to me. He said it's encrypted, so there's no paper trail, and no one can listen to our conversation. I still, to this day, don't know if that's true or not. Pecker then added how Trump became involved in all this, because before the McDougal issue, Pecker was just dealing with Cohen. Pecker said, I was in New Jersey at my largest investor, American Media, for a business presentation, and their assistant came in and said, Donald Trump is on the phone for you. So I left to pick up the phone to speak to Mr. Trump. And he mentioned that he had spoken to Michael, and he told me about Karen, and he said to me, what do you think? So I said, after Dylan Howard interviewed her, she claimed that she had an offer from ABC, from Dancing with the Stars, for her story. And she had an offer from a Mexican group for $8 million. I said to Trump, no, I don't believe there's an offer for $8 million. I think the story should be purchased, he said to Trump, and I believe we should buy it. Trump said to me, I don't buy any stories. Anytime you do anything like this, it gets out anyway. So I said, I still believe we should take this story off the market. Trump said to Pecker, let me think about it, and I'll have Michael Cohen call you back in a few days. Pecker's revelations weren't the only extraordinary fireworks in court today. The day actually began a different way, with Judge Merchan hearing evidence and arguments over Trump's gag order. The prosecution said that Trump has violated the gag order placed on him in this case at least 10 times. In his defense of the ex-president, Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, had a testy exchange with the judge who at one point said, quote, "You are losing all credibility with the court," which goes without saying. It's not a good thing to be losing this early in a criminal trial. We're still waiting at this hour for the judge's decision on the gag order. It could come out at any time while we're on the air today. That is where we start, though, with some of our most favorite reporters and friends, all of them joining us here at the table. Former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman is back, plus former prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman's here, back again after being inside the courthouse today. New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig, and my friend and colleague, NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's been down at the courthouse all day as well. Sue, I can see the stars from here, which is your really important stuff. Just start telling me what happened.
Wow, I mean, it was a day. I mean, I just sort of feel like this was a play we've been waiting for, and the curtain went up, and it was in the detail that David Pecker just calmly laid out. He was such a credible witness, just to go through the story with the doorman and how just the back and forth with Michael Cohen on that issue. What I found was really I just couldn't believe it. It was just the explanation of how if Michael Cohen wanted a story, if they needed a story on Ben Carson, he would phone over to the National Enquirer and say, "Oh, do a story on this on Ben Carson," and then the National Enquirer would embellish some details.
In their own words. That's how they described it, yeah.
And then embellish. And then a story would appear, or Ted Cruz. And one of it happened after debate. So they would sort of see somebody, maybe Ted Cruz was gaining traction. And Michael Cohen would phone over to David Pecker and say, order up a story on his affairs that he's not having. And they would embellish a story, and it would appear. And it was really striking to see at one point, and it went on the projector, I was sitting in the overflow room, and it was headline after headline.
Here they are on the screen.
But it was headline on one person, like 5 or 6, just on Ben Carson, 5 or 6 on Ted Cruz. I'm a journalist, and I was just shocked, and I thought back to yesterday when you were talking to Lachlan Cartwright, and he was just like, what the hell was going on? He said, nobody believed me, and I couldn't believe this. I mean, it was just so... It was wild to hear this story, and then to hear the checkbook journalism that was going on and the coordination, and at the end to hear, because the key thing is, and I think that I'm guessing that the defense is going to come in and say this was Michael Cohen on his own and he was a rogue actor, but to have it tied to Donald Trump, particularly with Karen McDougal, which was a longer relationship, and I think and that in that case, Dylan Howard, the editor who had gone out to see Karen McDougal in L.A., knew she was credible. She had a credible story to tell, and just the panic that ensued after that, and that went right up to Donald Trump. And the way David Pecker told the story was just, I mean, he was calm, it's interesting, he's such a credible narrator for someone who's made up so much stuff, but he came across as very credible.
Well, the thing for me, because I know the piece of the story that's so public because the Mueller investigation and because he ends up going to jail is Michael Cohen. But Michael Cohen, I mean, to use your play analogy, he sort of comes in Act 3. Pecker and Trump are friends for decades. Right. I mean, Trump calls Pecker when he buys the National Enquirer because Trump is connected to the National Enquirer and its import. Well, and we've covered the relationship with Fox. This is a nothing burger compared to the relationship with the National Enquirer. I started with that McDougal exchange, which actually chronologically comes toward the end of the day, because that's when Pecker, in his calm, and everyone has described him as credible and calm and likable, the kind of person a juror would find as likable and affable. He's describing being on the phone with Trump, and Trump doesn't say, I'm not going to buy the story because I didn't do it. Trump says, I'm not going to buy it because when you do that, it gets out anyway. Yeah, right. And just the intimacy with Trump and the catch and kill, which he's not on the stand embarrassed of catch and kill. He's proud to have practiced checkbook journalism. That was stunning.
It was, and I have to say some things really rang true with what David Pecker said going back to the Apprentice years. Donald Trump used to, they had a relationship, and it really flourished during The Apprentice, because David Pecker said the show was popular, he could put Trump on the cover, it was popular, and they would leak stories about contestants. And then the
ratings.
Well, I was going to say, the ratings were what I knew, because Donald Trump back then, you talk to anybody at NBC, that guy was obsessed with the ratings of The Apprentice, and he was leaking stories to the National Enquirer about the ratings. Like, when I heard that, it rang so true, because I knew all of that from other reporting that I had done. And this just continued, and then the moment, and then they continued to be friends, and then there was an email that was introduced where Donald Trump is now running for president, and that in June 2015, he gets this note from Michael Cohen, an email asking David Pecker, the editor of the National Enquirer, owner of the National Enquirer, to sit in the front row. And it was just this gushing email, like we couldn't imagine anybody else we would want to have there, in essence.
It seems clear, Vaughn, that the strategy is to tell the whole story with people that haven't broken with Trump. I mean, Hope Hicks comes in and plays pretty prominently in Pecker's testimony as well. She's part of the conspiracy to elevate Trump by killing bad stories and promoting good ones and smear the opponents. It appears that the DA's office can read the papers and is well aware of what the attacks. They seem determined to sort of preempt all the questions about Michael Cohen.
Right. And I think that if we take a step back and leave the legal trial aspect of this for a moment, we're talking about the presumptive Republican nominee for president in 2024. And now we have a friend of Donald Trump's dating back to the 1980s. They met at Mar-a-Lago, stayed in touch frequently over those 30 years. Now testifying today publicly, telling the entire country that he sat in a boardroom in Trump Tower with Donald Trump on his first presidential run and concocted a plan, which Donald Trump was pleased about, in his own words, to cover up those salacious stories. That was a plan that a longtime friend of him now tells the American public. And then the Karen McDougal story, to just watch that testimony play out here. Again, a longtime friend articulating that Donald Trump was aware of this alleged affair and called up a friend to say, how do we not let the American electorate know this story? That is so key. And then to add on to that is the fact that this same man then, when talking about not only his finances, but generally about Donald Trump, referred to him as a micromanager. He was aware of the invoices that came in, and that he didn't just sign the checks, as Todd Blanche alleged in his opening statements, but instead that he wanted to know where every penny was going. He was cautious, another word that he used. Donald Trump is the one that runs his campaign. He is the one that runs the Trump organization. Donald Trump is in charge, and David Pecker just testified exactly to that, on not only the allegations of the extramarital affairs, but also of how he runs his business.
And talk about Pecker putting Hope Hicks in the room.
Right, Trump Tower, that Hope Hicks was there, and she would make her way in and out. We also know that Hope Hicks was on the phone with Michael Cohen. There is so much more, kind of like the David Pecker testimony. We knew that there was going to be more coming. But Hope Hicks wouldn't be brought forward as a witness by the prosecution if she didn't have more details to share. And that is what awaits us.
The other piece that's so interesting in terms of educating not just the jury but the public is how much money they spent to kill these stories. I mean, a normal National Enquirer, and again, I had no idea. I had no idea what the going rate was. And to your point, Lachlan got into some of this yesterday, but, $500, $1,000, they were dropping $30,000, $100. I mean, they were massive subs of money in this market of tabloid catch and kill.
Absolutely. And this was the first time that David Pecker says that he bought salacious stories for the purposes of never actually publishing them. And they threatened Dino the doorman with $1 million penalty if he were to not abide by the contract and were to reveal his story publicly elsewhere.
What do you think?
Well, just to Vaughn's point, which is, I keep on saying this is ground zero of fake news. I know I'm here to give a legal analysis, but if you move away from the legal niceties, I can fit this into a legal grid and why it's all relevant and how it's going to play into the summations. But let's just focus on the big picture. The person who ran for and became president, there is one of his best friends on the stand credibly saying, without Donald Trump, by the way, Truth Socialing about how he's awful and can't be believed. There's no adverse comments about him, which is fascinating to me. On the stand saying that we manufactured bad stories about our opponents, whether it's Ted Cruz, whether it's Hillary Clinton. We just came up with fake stories, fake news. And then with respect to damaging stories, we killed them. So that was sort of, to me, the big picture. The other, just to Suzanne's point about credibility, one of the things that you look for in witnesses and you argue at the end of the case is, were they gilding the lily? Were they saying everything that's possibly bad about this? And here, with David Pecker saying, well, Donald Trump initially was like, I'm not sure we need to pay for this because it's going to come out. That's not what you would say if you're just going to make up a story. You would have said, he was all in from day one. How do we silence this? So I thought that was, a really good thing. The doorman, he says, just to be clear, that story was fake. It was wrong. And he could have, if he was trying to just say something that was going to damage Donald Trump, he would have said, oh, well, we couldn't be sure there was something there. And so you really
So you're saying there's some temperamental moderation to him. And the fact that Trump isn't out there saying David Pecker's lost a step, he's half the media mogul he used to be, means that there's nothing out there that suggests that everything he said, and frankly, what's damaging to Trump in terms of answering whether or not a crime was committed is the McDougal story, is the catch and kill, is the money. And you're saying that he hangs on to every scrap of credibility with these nuances.
Yeah, absolutely. I do find it fascinating that, you have Donald Trump attacking the judge, that's allowed, attacking the lead prosecutor, that's allowed, but also doing things that are not allowed, attacking jurors and witnesses. But it is fascinating to me that David Pecker and Hope Hicks, not yet the subject of his ire. So I do think I'm curious as to why, because unless David Pecker is going to really change on cross, I think he is going to be in his sights because he's going to have to start attacking him. And I mean, because it is, I know a lot of people thought, oh, Michael Cohen will be the star witness. But there's a reason, as to your point, that they're starting with David Pecker. He has the full story.
Well, yeah, I mean, you listen to and I want to read some of it. I'm no Rachel Maddow, but I do want to read it for anyone who hasn't seen the transcripts yet. The timeline is so important, and I think wasn't really obvious to me that the Pecker-Trump relationship, the catch and kill stuff, Cohen comes in and is like a chief of staff, but the brain fathers of it, if the catch and kill scheme is the love child, the parents are Pecker and Trump.
I think that's right, and I think that there are a number of things that the prosecution did really, really well today. But before I get to be a lawyer as well, I'll say that I find it very fascinating that Donald Trump, the candidate who's locked in a courtroom for 6 weeks, has to deal with this new revelation about how the sausage is made. To Andrew's point around the fake news, now it's sort of out there about how these manufactured and embellished stories sort of made you this superhuman candidate for your supporters. And I am curious as to how that, if at all, impacts the electorate for Donald Trump, the candidate. As far as Donald Trump, the defendant, I'm sure we'll get to the gag order in that hearing because that was just an entire mess. But when you're talking about what the prosecution has to do, we already know that there have been myriad attacks on the credibility of the other witnesses that are yet to come. And so for this to be the first witness that the prosecution puts in front of the jury, what they did effectively was laid the groundwork to say later on, you actually don't have to believe Michael Cohen. You may not think he's the most credible witness. You actually don't have to sort of hold Stormy Daniels in the highest of regards. You may feel like she has ulterior motives. But David Pecker, someone who, of all our witnesses, knows Donald Trump the absolute best, has said these things and given us such a framework that is going to be corroborated by everything else, it helps them to a very big degree. The other thing that it does, or that they did very well today with Pecker's testimony, is that they took away this notion of Donald Trump being removed, not only in terms of him sort of being a micromanager as a business owner, but also placing him in conversations, very specific conversations about how these things were going to run. So to act now as though you had no knowledge of these things is simply untenable. You're not going to be able to maintain that in front of the jury. So this was a very effective day by the prosecution. And I think that in terms of setting themselves up for everything that they have coming, particularly with the witnesses they know are going to have some degree of challenges on the stand, they did a fantastic job.
Imagine that. I was just thinking, because there was a discussion at the beginning of the trial about exactly how much of this relationship between David Pecker and Donald Trump would be allowed in. And you just now see how crucial it was that the government was allowed to let in so much of it and to set the full table for exactly what was going on. Because there was some discussion that it would just be what David Pecker knew about Karen McDougal storming McDonald's and the doorman. And Andrew probably could speak a bit more to that, but I was thinking that today.
Well, and because if you have to prove that it's a crime in service of another crime, the scheme is, I mean, the other thing, having worked on campaigns, that he's at Trump Tower in June of 2016. I mean, in a normal presidential campaign in June, you're not hatching your catch and kill scheme with the National Enquirer. That date just was like nails on a chalkboard for me.
Wow.
And this was not entered into the court record, if I may here. But again, when we're talking about what Donald Trump said in the public versus what Donald Trump in the testimony that David Pecker is providing, I went back to my notes from March 25th of 2016, the day that the super salacious story about multiple affairs that Ted Cruz had that were unsubstantiated, but were just
5.
They
right?
were. It was damning.
The
that
headlines
day.
like Ted Cruz has 5 affairs.
It was what everybody was talking about.
Volume business of scandal. Like we found out yesterday, there were 5. It's insane.
And it's what everybody was talking about.
Right.
And Ted Cruz, if I may, he
Please.
quickly responded. I was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin with him on the trail, and he said, they're complete and utter lies. Smear that has come up from Donald Trump and his henchmen, all of which started with Donald Trump. Let me be clear. Donald Trump may be a rat, but I have no desire to copulate with him. Ted Cruz, or I should say Donald Trump, on the other hand, this was the beginning of Donald Trump's statement that day. Quote, I have no idea whether or not the cover story about Ted Cruz in this week's issue of the National Enquirer is true or not, but I had absolutely nothing to do with it, did not know about it, and have not, as yet, read it. I have nothing.
It literally came from his office. It's
Likewise,
insane.
I have nothing to do with the National Enquirer. And unlike Lion Ted Cruz, I do not surround myself with political hacks and henchmen and then pretend total innocence.
Vaughn, did you hear anything from Ted Cruz today?
And Ted Cruz told our Sahil up on Capitol Hill that he did not want to revisit ancient history.
Ancient. It was not that long ago.
I just want to vote for him. Right?
Same with
Just
Ted Cruz.
I just want to
to be
support him
clear.
now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Say.
that's the second part of big picture of this is you have ground zero fake news, and you have people who are the victims of it, who, I mean, at least unlike Mike Pence, who has said, you know what, you know where a bridge too far is? When you're trying to kill me. But you know, that's a small universe of.
But it's a bridge that Ted Cruz doesn't. Okay,
And Ben Carson became a secretary in his cabinet, and is still campaigning for him.
I'm going to put my glasses on and read from this. We're going to stop. It's going to be so fun. Don't go anywhere. Still to come for all of us. Donald Trump and his lawyers telling the jury this week that the candidates' relationship.
Back then or now?
Now.
They didn't want to hurt him.
You think it's because of a personal relationship with the guy who runs AMI is friends with Donald Trump?
Correct.
I remember that evening when Anderson Cooper interviewed McDougal. I was sitting at dinner with my ex-wife, with Jared Kushner, and Ivanka Trump, and the phone rings. And Ivanka goes into the kitchen, answers the phone. Oh, it's Daddy. And what did Daddy want to know? Whether they were watching McDougal. So he was, you know, he was very, very concerned about it.
That will forever be my Trump as daddy face. This is, again, part of the story we didn't know, right? What we knew was what was public facing. Let me read from the transcripts some of how the women and the mission of silencing the women took shape. Bragg's team, you mentioned women in particular. Did you raise that or did someone else raise that? Pecker, in a presidential campaign, I was the person that thought there would be a lot of women who'd come out to try to sell their stories because Trump was a well-known as the most eligible bachelor. And I mean, this is why he'll never attack him, right? And the most beautiful women. And it was clear based on my past experience that when someone's running for public office, it's very common for these women to call up magazines like the National Enquirer and try to sell their stories. Bragg team, what about Bill and Hillary Clinton? Did their names come up? Pecker, yes. Hillary running for president and Bill Clinton as a womanizer did very well on the covers. I was running Hillary as an enabler for Bill Clinton. With respect to the womanizing stuff, it was easy for me to say I'd keep running those stories. Did you believe it would help his campaign? Pecker, it was of mutual benefit. Bragg team, how did Mr. Trump react to that suggestion that you'd continue to do that and run those stories? Pecker, he was pleased. Michael Cohen was pleased. Bragg team, you started to allude to earlier that to some extent this arrangement you came to at Trump Tower meeting was mutually beneficial. Can you explain what you meant by that? Pecker, in writing positive stories about Mr. Trump and covering the election and writing negative stories about his opponents, it was only going to increase newsstand sales for the National Enquirer. So for me, that was my benefit. And then in publishing these stories, it would also benefit his campaign. Bragg team, the portion of the agreement that involved notifying Mr. Cohen about negative stories about women or whatnot, what was the objective of that? David Pecker, as I did in the past, when I notified Michael Cohen of a negative story, he would try to vet it himself to see if it's true or not. And then he would go to the individual publication to make sure it wasn't getting published and getting killed. Bragg team, prior to that meeting, had you ever purchased a story not to print it? Pecker, no. Bragg team, and how did that part of it, not publishing those stories, help you? Pecker, it didn't. Crazy.
Fake news. It's fake news. I mean, this is your point. It's like nothing's new. It's like it's all projection of what he was doing. I mean, it's really unbelievable. Now, this is going to go to the election fraud, which is as you said, this is the false business records. You have to prove that it was intended to aid to cover up or further another crime. So this is going to be the state election crimes, which the DA today in court said is the main way they're going to argue that this is a felony. And so all of this goes to election fraud. And I have to say, this is where, again, as a citizen and thus as a lawyer arguing a case, I mean, you can't hear this and think, oh, this is great. I mean, at a basic level, this is fraud.
Well, and the other thing is, what you could maybe turn to is it was mutually beneficial. What the prosecution ruled out was that the part that's criminal wasn't.
Right, and I think that that's really important. So we've been talking a lot about the content, and so legally, I just want to for a moment zone in and discuss the context. This is a trial, and they're playing to a jury, and this is the first witness that they're hearing from. Why am I saying this? Because in order to get to the actual illegal part, there's a lot that has to be laid out. You have to get to the documents. You have to corroborate that. That's not particularly interesting, and it's not particularly gripping if you're the jury. So what you have to do as the prosecution very early on is that you have to paint a picture for them that they can follow so that by the time you get to the point that you're introducing the documents, it makes sense to them and they know where to place it. So beyond just the content being sort of very interesting and very salacious, what they did today and what they're doing with all of this is grabbing the jury in and painting a very clear picture chronologically about, number one, how this relationship with David Pecker and Donald Trump existed, and number two, how these other peripheral characters who they will hear from or hear about play a role down the line. As a prosecutor, you are selling a story to your jury, and they did that by laying this foundation with David Pecker today.
How does Pecker get limited immunity from the Department of Justice? And Cohen, who it's clear from Pecker's testimony, is like a middle manager in the scheme. Go to jail.
Yeah, I mean, so some of that is when somebody comes in. So if you are just starting out in a case, so let's just take, I worked on Enron. You have very little to go on, and you're trying to find a toehold. Ideally, you're trying to find the lowest level person, and if you're going to give somebody immunity, usually you want it to be the lowest level person, and then you build up. But with David Pecker and Michael Cohen, where you might say, you know what, they're relatively the same. You might say, you know, maybe David Pecker's a little more guilty, maybe Michael Cohen's a little less. But, you know, in some ways, you're sitting there going, well, what do I have to prove a crime? And the first person to come in may get the better deal.
But how does Pecker evade criminal scrutiny for election interference at the federal level? With the immunity deal?
Yeah, with an immunity deal.
Without the immunity deal?
So
does he face prosecution? Would he face prosecution? Yeah,
well, I mean, this is like, that's a great question because, you know, the president didn't. So, you know, if you're positing a good faith DOJ that's operating under all norms, then you would say, yes, you could, if you had the proof, you could prosecute all three, including the president.
But I'm not going to look at it that way, because this was Bill Barr's DOJ, and I want to go back to the transcript. I think that maybe he got immunity from Donald Trump's Justice Department because he said, quote, Trump was a well-known as the most eligible bachelor and dated the most beautiful. I mean, that stinks.
Yeah, except, I mean, you would need to know sort of at the time that this was done. I mean, remember, this was the Southern District of New York. They were building a case, and he's represented.
Against who?
Well, certainly against Michael Cohen, and you can tell that they were trying to build a case against the president.
I guess what I'm asking is, could a twist of fate have given Michael Cohen limited immunity and Pecker jail time?
Absolutely.
And do you, I mean, I guess it's just so interesting in hindsight.
Yeah,
the relationship is deeper and longer with Pecker.
Absolutely.
The killing of the stories that don't benefit Pecker is now on the record, and Cohen went to jail.
So this is where, Elkin Abramowitz represents David Pecker. He is an extremely good, well-known defense lawyer. He's about as good as you can get on the defense side. And sometimes you have somebody going, you know what? This is your time to go in and get immunity. I'm going to give a proffer to them as to what to say, as to what you are going to say. And if they think that's truthful, then this is the moment, because you know what? This is your window to come in, because they might be thinking Michael Cohen might come in. So, and your deal will be, as you will getting the Michael Cohen deal, meaning you'll be prosecuted. That happens a lot. The thing that's unusual here is you usually don't like to give immunity what's called top down. And this is maybe,
so you think Pecker is above Cohen in this case?
At the very least, they both have a lot of culpability. I mean, what I'd say about Michael Cohen is he may have slightly less culpability in this scheme, but he also has a broad range of criminality that he's admitted.
Right.
So, you have to take that into account. But I really think this is, prosecutors don't get to know 100% what's out in the world. They are sort of beholden to, like, who's coming in, what are their options at the time.
It's fascinating. I have to sneak in a break. We're going to broaden this out. We're also going to talk to someone who was on the front lines of watching Donald Trump's relationship with the media, all the media, both as a candidate.
He'll be the star witness of this case, and why the prosecution are really going to be relying on him. He can really set the table here. Going back to that meeting at Trump Tower in 2015, in August of 2015, 2 months after Donald Trump goes down the escalator, where they have this meeting, it's Michael Cohen and it's Trump and it's David Pecker, and where Pecker says he'll be the eyes and ears of the campaign.
Lachlan Cartwright yesterday on David Pecker being the star witness. Boy, was he right. The details of the catch and kill scheme that David Pecker's former editor told us about yesterday that his boss would be able to share with the jury as he's done today. It's a relationship that Pecker described as mutually beneficial, except in the case of the stories that were killed between the National Enquirer and Donald Trump. It's a relationship that grew significantly over time into in-person visits every month after Trump announced his candidacy for president. Pecker detailed the secret plan to catch and kill any negative stories about Trump and women, something he would run by Michael Cohen, as well as the, quote, embellish negative stories that Vaughn's been talking about Trump's political rivals. Pecker says they, quote, pleased both Trump and Cohen, and Pecker admitted they, quote, benefited the campaign explicitly. Joining our conversation, NPR media correspondent David Folkenflik is here. Our whole table is with us. David, your thoughts about what we're learning for the first time from David